The first time it came, Ozioma didn't understand. She had only just turned 9. Her belly had ached through the night, sharp and low, the kind of pain that made her curl into herself. She had thought maybe it was the unripe guava she had stolen from Auntie MBA's tree, or maybe the heaviness in her chest when the older girls laughed too loudly near the river and she didn't understand the joke. But when she rose the next morning, legs shaking, and looked down at the woven mat beneath her, she saw the small dark stain spreading quietly between her thighs. It looked like oil. It smelled of iron and warm rust. She touched it with 2 fingers, then cried out. It was hers and it was wrong. She knew it without needing anyone to say it. Girls in her compound did not bleed at 9. Not even the most grown-looking among them. Not even the girl whose mother whispered about her behind closed doors. She tried to clean it with her wrapper, but the stain only widened. By the time her aunt entered the room, the mat was half wet, and Ozioma was hiding behind the water drum, hands shaking, mouth already forming apologies. But it wasn't her aunt who gasped. It was the elder from the shrine, standing beside her aunt in the doorway, his staff thumping once against the clay. She is marked, he said quietly. Her aunt looked at her with tight lips and did not move. She has no business bleeding before her voice knows wisdom. This is not a child's flow, the elder continued. This is an early stirring, and such stirrings bring ruin if left unbound. That was how it began. They took her outside in front of the compound before the others had begun cooking. Her wrapper was removed. A red cloth was wrapped around her waist. A small gourd, hollow, freshly carved, the bottom curved like a bloated smile, was tied to the sash. It hung on her left hip, cold and rough against her skin. This will carry the filth you do not yet understand, said the elder. You are not allowed to speak from sunrise to sunset. Not a word. You will not greet. You will not sing. Your tongue must sleep while your womb betrays you. Ozioma looked up, her mouth parting. A slap silenced her before the words came. No speech, her aunt snapped. You already bleed. Must you also shame us with noise? She stood there while the neighbors watched. Children her age turned their heads. The older ones whispered, nudged one another, pointed at the gourd. She wanted to run, but the cloth was too tight around her waist, and the air had stopped belonging to her. For the rest of the day she walked with her head bowed, the gourd bumping against her hip with each step. It was sealed at the top with beeswax, yet it made a sound, a soft liquid slosh, that followed her everywhere. With every slosh a reminder. Asterisk, you are early. You are unclean. You are wrong. Asterisk. She was not allowed to sit where the other girls sat. Not allowed to touch the communal pots. Her water was drawn from a different jug. Even her sleeping mat was moved outside beside the henhouse. If she sneezed, no one said bless you. If she stubbed her toe, she could not cry. And still the bleeding did not stop. At night, when the moon was highest and the drums at the edge of the village quieted, she was called to the elder's compound. There were 5 of them, old men with hollow voices and heavier eyes, sitting cross-legged around a small fire. They made her kneel. One cut the wax seal off the gourd. Another tilted her chin up. You must drink. She shook her head violently. Her aunt's hand appeared from the dark, slapped her cheek hard enough to make her bite her tongue. She must obey, said the elder. They tilted the gourd. It wasn't full. Just a few sips of warm, rusty water mixed with herbs she couldn't name. It tasted like sadness. It tasted like something pulled from the back of the mouth and swallowed in shame. She coughed, choked, spat, but they made her finish. Then they chanted. Low, droning voices calling her blood back into order, naming her body as traitor, her womb as too eager, her spirit as too loud. The chants wrapped around her like vines. Let the silence take root, let the fruit not bloom before its time, let the shame dissolve before the sun returns. They made her drink from the gourd every night for a week. Each morning it was tied back to her side. Each day she walked like a ghost in bright cloth, the little slosh of shame tapping rhythm into every step. On the 6th night she didn't cry. On the 7th she bit her tongue on purpose so the blood in her mouth would taste like hers, not theirs. By the 2nd week the bleeding slowed, not stopped but quieter. The gourd felt lighter. Her waist no longer stung from the sash. But they didn't unbind her. Instead they burned markings onto the gourd, symbols she couldn't read, lines like roots and rivers, etched with a hot iron. They told her this meant her body had been sealed, that her blood would be watched now, that any future bleedings would be tested, and if found rebellious she would be sent to the hut near the grove, where other early bleeders were kept silent for entire seasons. She wanted to ask what rebellious blood was, but her tongue remained still. That day a younger girl, one of the daughters of the chief, pulled her aside by the breadfruit tree and asked in a whisper, "Does it hurt when you wear it?" Ozioma only blinked. "Do you feel it drinking you?" the girl asked. Still Ozioma said nothing. The girl looked disappointed. "They said your blood tried to run out too fast. That you were trying to grow into a woman before your voice was ready." Ozioma stared at the gourd, the sun glinting off its burned edge. She thought of the blood. Of the gourd warm in her hand. Of the taste at night. She thought of the way the chance had settled into her bones. The way her body had started to believe the shame they poured into her. The way she could still feel the fire from the elder's breath when he said her womb was a mistake. That night they called her again. She went without protest. Knelt. Drank. Lowered her head as they chanted. But this time her fingers wrapped around the base of the gourd with purpose. This time, when they sealed it again and tied it to her waist, she let her hand linger. And she whispered, though no one heard, a word she did not know she had learned. Enough. The gourd grew heavier. Warmer. And though her mouth remained closed by day, something else in her had begun to speak. The sun rose and fell again and again, but the gourd did not change. Not in the way they said it would. They had told her it would rot. That the blood of a cursed girl would curdle inside the hollow. That she would carry her shame as a stench. That flies would follow her like forgotten prayers, and the people would smell her sin before they saw her face. They warned her that the gourd would swell and darken, that maggots would gather when the time was right. But none of that happened. The gourd stayed the same. No smell. No rot. No mold creeping along the carvings. The wax seal held, the gourd stayed warm, and when Ozioma shook it gently in the silence of night, the liquid inside moved softly, alive somehow like breath in a bottle. They didn't notice at first. The elders grew bored of watching her. She obeyed their rules. She didn't speak. She didn't run. She bathed separately and cooked last. Her aunt beat her less. The other girls stopped staring. The chants grew less frequent. The shame ceremony became old news. And so, the village returned to its rhythm, while Ozioma walked quietly with the gourd still tied to her hip. But something had shifted. In her. It began with the dreams. At first they were nothing but flashes. Light under water, red fabric floating through tree branches, drums that throbbed without hands. But then they deepened. Became sounds. Words. Shapes. She dreamed of women standing in rivers with bowls full of stars. Of trees bowing when she passed. Of gourds cracked open not with pain, but joy. She woke sweating. Not from fear but from knowing. Her body hummed when she moved. Her palms tingled. Her skin, always so sensitive to cold or punishment, now warmed when she stood near the fire, not from the flame, but from the fire inside her. One morning when she stepped into the compound, the birds in the rafters paused their song. They turned toward her. And kept still. As if listening. Ozioma looked up. Said nothing. But she knew something had begun. That afternoon, the gourd brushed against her side as she bent to lift a pot. She winced, not in pain but from heat. It was warmer than it had ever been, almost like it pulsed. She touched it gently. The wood beneath the cloth was not burning but alive. Later that day her aunt asked her to bring herbs from the back shed. When she returned, a visitor had arrived. The healer. Mama Orem. Old, stooped, lips always pursed. She wore a scarf the color of storm clouds and never laughed. But everyone trusted her hands. The aunt turned, startled to see Ozioma, and whispered something low. Mama Orem squinted at the gourd. That one still carries it? She bleeds too early, the aunt muttered. But the shame will rot out. She still wears it? The aunt nodded. Every day. Mama Orem frowned. Let me hold it. The aunt hesitated. Then nodded. Ozioma didn't resist as the woman's fingers reached under the sash and untied the gourd. She watched carefully, holding her breath as the warmth left her skin for the first time in weeks. The healer held the gourd to her nose. Tilted it. Listened to it. Then her eyes changed. They widened. Her lips parted. She didn't speak right away. When she did, her voice was smaller than anyone had ever heard it. This is not spoiled. The aunt frowned. What do you mean? It smells like old fire, Mama Orem said. And something else. Something clean. The aunt stepped back. Open it, she said quickly. Maybe it just hasn't turned yet. But the healer shook her head. No. If it was cursed blood, it would stink by now. It would swarm with flies. But this, she turned toward Ozioma. This is not shame. The aunt hissed. She bled before the moon ever looked at her. You said early bloomers bring ruin. I said unbalanced ones bring ruin, the healer corrected, her voice growing. This girl is not unbalanced. She is strange. She dreams. She stares at trees like they talk. Sometimes I hear her humming without opening her mouth. The healer looked at the gourd again, her fingers trembling. This gourd is warm, she murmured. And it hums back. She tied it again to Ozioma's waist with trembling hands, as if afraid to hold it too long. Then she left. Nothing was said after that. The aunt didn't call for the elders. No new chants were made. But Ozioma noticed how her food portions grew smaller. How her mat was moved farther from the doorway. How her aunt stopped meeting her eyes. The village didn't notice what the healer had whispered, but the house did. And the gourd changed again. That night, when she untied it alone and held it in the moonlight, it glowed faintly. Just a little where the blood sat near the bottom curve. A warmth that pulsed like the beat of a song she couldn't name. She didn't try to open it. She only pressed it against her chest, right over her heart. And when she closed her eyes, she heard voices. Not loud. Not frightening. Welcoming. Like laughter in another room. Like women waiting at the riverbank. Even the dreams changed. She no longer saw the elders. No longer heard the chants. She stood instead in circles of women, barefoot in wet soil, her waist gourd open, steam rising from it like breath from a wound that had healed. One of them placed her hands on Ozioma's shoulders and said, "You did not bleed too early. They just listened too late." She awoke with wet cheeks. She did not wipe them away. The gourd stayed warm through the next week. One day she passed near the forest edge and the leaves rustled without wind. She stopped. Waited. Felt it. The trees knew her now. They moved when she passed. They leaned gently. One even dropped a single leaf into her palm. She smiled at it. Didn't say thank you. She couldn't. She still wasn't allowed to speak in daylight. But inside her, something was speaking louder than ever. And the gourd, the cursed thing they had tied to her waist, pulsed once more, not with punishment but with power. And stayed warm. The nights had grown quieter. Or perhaps it was Ozioma who had changed. Even the insects seemed to hush when she stepped outside, the gourd warm against her waist. Her aunt now refused to look her in the eye, and the other women pretended not to notice when the blood-carved symbols on the gourd began to shift, ever so slightly. No one mentioned the faint hum that followed Ozioma when she moved. And no one asked why the dogs no longer barked at her, why the trees bent ever so subtly as she passed. She had grown used to the weight of the gourd, to the pulsing heat that radiated from it like a sleeping heartbeat. In the day she carried it like a burden. At night it felt like something else entirely, not a punishment but a presence. Sometimes she dreamed it was breathing. Then one night it spoke. It was just after midnight and she was outside, drawing water to wash her feet. Her aunt had forbidden her from using the household pots, so she often bathed under the banana trees, where the moonlight sifted down like dust. She set the calabash aside and began to unwind the cloth that held the gourd to her waist. But before she could fully loosen it, she heard it. Ozioma. Soft. Inside her bones. She froze. Her name had not been spoken aloud in days, not with affection, not even with scorn. The villagers had begun calling her the blood girl, or worse, cursed child. But this voice said her name the way someone might hold a shell to their ear to listen for the ocean. With reverence. With memory. She looked down. The gourd was still tied to her hip. It pulsed once, faintly, a soft throb against her skin. Then again louder. Ozioma. She gasped and stepped back. The sash came undone. The gourd fell. It struck the earth with a gentle thud and began to roll, slow and deliberate, in a half-circle around her feet. It made no erratic bounce, no uncertain tumble. It rolled as if it knew exactly where to go. Then it stopped. And tipped upward. The mouth of the gourd faced her, open, expectant. She stared. It had never opened on its own before. The wax seal had long since melted away on its own weeks ago, but the gourd had always remained still. Close. Contained. Now it waited. Like an offering. Or a question. She knelt beside it, heart pounding. Inside the gourd, the blood looked thick but not spoiled. Still that same dark shimmer, still warm, but different somehow, glowing faintly at the rim. She leaned closer. A scent rose. Not the iron tang she had grown used to, but something older. Charcoal, damp earth, crushed petals, smoke after rain. She trembled. Then reached out. And drank. The moment the blood touched her tongue, her vision cracked open. It wasn't pain. It was remembering. She wasn't standing in the forest anymore. She was somewhere else. Many places all at once. A clearing. A riverbank. A field with yellow reeds. And in each place a girl stood barefoot wearing a gourd on her waist. Their faces were not hers, but their eyes mirrored hers exactly, wide, startled, strong. Some bled into cloth, some into bark, some straight into the dirt. But all were silent, all surrounded by watchers who pointed, who chanted, who turned shame into a story and carved it onto skin. She saw one girl forced to lie in a pit for 3 days, her gourd left open beside her, so the flies could teach the blood its place. Another was paraded naked through her village, the elders lifting her gourd high as if it were a trophy. Another, smallest of all, was locked in a hut and told to whisper her apology to the gourd each night until it decided to forgive her. The visions tore through Ozioma like wind through dry grass. Then just as fast they shifted again. This time she saw rivers. Deep ones. Wider than any she had ever known. She saw the same girls walking toward the water, alone. They didn't cry. They didn't run. They walked with their gourds still tied to them, until the water reached their waists, then their shoulders, then their chins. And then they were gone. No splashes. No bubbles. Just silence. But the gourds floated. And from them rose steam, not smoke, not fire, but something luminous. Like light being exhaled. The gourds glowed, pulsed, and slowly sank. One by one. And then she saw trees. Ancient ones older than memory. Roots that reached deeper than the village wells. And there, beneath those trees, were the girls again. Not children now, but women, strong, glowing from within, arms painted with red and gold, standing tall. Their gourds had transformed, no longer vessels of shame, but tools of power. One opened her mouth, and instead of words, a river poured out. Another raised her palm, and a sapling burst from the ground. Another turned, smiled at Ozioma through the vision, and said, "Asterisk, when they curse you early, they awaken you early." Asterisk. The vision shattered like glass. Ozioma gasped, falling back into herself, the night air rushing against her cheeks. She was still beside the banana trees. The water pot was still at her side. The gourd still stood upright, mouth open. But now her lips were stained red. She looked at her hands. They glowed, not bright, not burning, but softly. As if something ancient had come home. The gourd pulsed again once. Then settled. She reached for it, gently lifting it to her waist again. As it touched her hip, a warmth spread up her side and into her ribs. Her breath deepened. The silence was different now. Not forced. Not heavy. But full. The night air wrapped around her like a cloak. The trees rustled again, not as wind but as witness. She did not run back inside. She stayed under the stars until the moon passed over her head. And the next night, when she approached the gourd again, it whispered not just her name but others. Names she didn't know yet, but would remember. The next night she drank again. There was no ceremony this time, no hesitation. Ozioma untied the sash herself, cradled the gourd in her hands like it was something tender, something breathing. The moment the blood touched her lips, warmth spilled through her chest, not sharp or sudden, but like a lantern being lit softly in the dark, one wick at a time. And the visions came. This time slower. This time fuller. She saw her mother. Not as she was now, cold, hard, always watching the floor when Ozioma entered, but younger, softer. Her hands were pressed to her face as she crouched by a fire. The flames cracked quietly. Her mother's body shook, but no sound came out. She was hiding her weeping even in solitude. The gourd was tied at her waist. Unmarked. Clean. Still sealed. But her shoulders told the truth. Bent. Bruised. Familiar. Ozioma leaned closer in the vision, wanting to speak. To ask when it happened, who had hurt her, why she never said anything. But the vision slipped away. And the blood gave her more. This time it was an older woman, not her mother. Not even her grandmother. A woman with deep skin and silver rings through her nose, barefoot and laughing, though her wrists were wrapped in iron. She danced in a circle of red earth while men watched from a distance, uncertain whether to join her or run. Chains clinked. Bells sang from her ankles. And from her mouth rose a tune, no words, just a sound, a humming that vibrated in the bones, low and steady. Ozioma felt it in her gut before she heard it in her ear. MMM. The tune pulsed through the vision like a heartbeat. The woman's eyes turned suddenly toward Ozioma, and in that flash she saw her own face in the ancestors, just older, wiser, wilder. Then the vision shattered again. She was back by the banana trees. Her breath was trembling. Her fingers tingled. She sat with her back to the earth, staring up at the stars, and without meaning to, she opened her mouth. The tune came out. The same one. A hum. Simple. Round. slow. Like it had lived in her throat all this time, buried beneath silence. Mm. She hummed it once, then again, and something stirred. From the bushes behind her came the rustle of leaves. A bird landed nearby, one of the night dwellers not meant to fly so close to humans. It perched on a low branch, head tilted, feathers slick with dew. It didn't blink. She kept humming. A second sound, feet brushing through grass. A stray dog, ribs sharp, fur dull, stepped into the clearing. It sat on its haunches beside her like it had always belonged there. Then frogs. Then the wind. All around her, the dark began to gather, not in fear, but in listening. The song inside her grew fuller. She stood slowly, gourd still in her hand, and hummed louder. The blood inside the gourd seemed to warm again, pulsing with each note. Not spilling, not boiling, just responding. Calling. The shame they had tied to her hip now sang back. She turned toward the trees. And the trees leaned forward. In the days that followed, the tune did not leave her. She hummed it beneath her breath while washing roots, when hauling firewood, when alone behind the cooking huts. No one stopped her. No one dared. Her aunt watched from doorways, silent, arms folded tightly. The other women whispered more than before but kept their distance. Children peeked at her from corners. Sometimes when she passed they would mimic the tune without knowing why, a little hum, a little breathy note, and their mothers would hush them quickly and slap their legs. She never scolded them. Because the tune was not just hers. It belonged to many mouths. To many wounds. To many women who had been silenced and told their blood was unnatural. Each time she drank from the gourd now, the visions deepened. One night, she saw a girl no older than 7 with salt tied into her hair, kneeling at the ocean's edge, humming the same song. A storm thundered in the background, but the girl kept humming, and the sea stilled. Another night, she saw 2 women chained together, walking across stone. One of them opened her mouth, started the tune, and the metal around their feet cracked like dried clay. But the most powerful vision came on the 12th night. She stood in a wide clearing and the moon was low. Dozens of women stood in a circle, each one with a gourd at her hip, but theirs were different. Made of glass, of clay, of smoke. Some held theirs aloft like lanterns, others wore theirs like armor. One even had hers carved into her rib cage, where it pulsed like a second heart. They all hummed. Ozioma felt the song rise in her throat, and when she joined, her gourd lifted of its own accord. It floated from her hip and glowed like a small sun. And the women began to dance. No chains. No shame. Only rhythm. Only blood that meant something. Only the calling. The trees around them clapped their leaves in time. The earth pulsed. Even the sky seemed to nod, stars blinking to the beat. And in the center of the circle stood the ancestor from before, the woman with the nose rings and the iron scars. She lifted her hand. And the humming stopped. Silence fell. Then she said, Asterisk, when your blood sings, you are no longer theirs to bind. You carry the memory now. Asterisk. Ozioma woke with her whole body aching. But it wasn't the ache of punishment or fatigue. It was the ache of holding a river in a cup. The gourd at her hip was warm. Her tongue still tasted of fire. The hum still lived in her chest. She stood, stretched, and sang the tune one more time, and somewhere in the distance something howled back. They had stopped chanting at her. No more fire circle prayers. No more whispered warnings from the elders. The village had grown wary of Ozioma, not just because she still carried the gourd but because she walked without shrinking. Because she hummed when she walked. Because the goats did not startle when she passed, and because the river sometimes rippled toward her feet, not away. But not all were quiet. One elder, Obiaker, the oldest of them all, kept speaking. He would shake his carved staff when she passed the shrine gates and mutter, "Children who bleed too soon carry rot in their marrow." Sometimes he was louder. "Mark my words, her blood will drown us all." The other elders, younger than he and slower to anger, simply looked away. They didn't argue with him. But they no longer nodded either. Ozioma never answered. She only walked past him, the gourd pulsing faintly against her hip. It was on the 3rd day of the new moon that the coughing began. At first it sounded like a clearing of the throat. Sharp, brief, nothing worth pausing over. But by afternoon, his voice cracked in the middle of his sentences. His chants turned ragged. And by evening, the cough was thick, tearing through him again and again, until the shrine girls were sent to fetch water from the well. But the water did not soothe him. He choked on it. He shouted hoarsely that something was stuck in his throat. Then he began to shout something stranger. "Red. Red. The water is red." His wives tried to calm him, but he screamed louder. She's in the water. Her face, her eyes, her mouth is full of song. He wouldn't sleep that night. He was seen pacing around the compound, shirt half undone, eyes wide like fire had taken root behind them. He refused food, slapped away calabashes of healing broth, clutched his throat, cried out, it's rising, until dawn painted the sky. And that was when Ozioma drank again. The forest behind her aunt's house was still, the leaves hung low with dew. The animals had gathered again, silent as always. The gourd felt hot to the touch. She sat cross-legged, unwrapped it, and when the blood touched her lips, it showed her. The surface of the blood in the gourd shimmered like a mirror, and in its reflection, Obiaker, sweating, coughing, hands clawing at his own chest. Behind him, red water rose, not fast, not flooding, but steady, up to his knees, then his waist, his neck. His mouth opened to scream, but no sound came. His beard floated. His eyes rolled. The water didn't bubble. It simply kept rising. He wasn't dead, but he was drowning. Drowning in something no one else could see. Ozioma pulled back. The gourd pulsed once, and then it whispered. Oh, familiar. Like breath on the back of the neck. He tasted his own words now. She sat quietly for a long time after that. She thought of the first night they had made her drink. Of how the men had circled her with their chants. Of how she had swallowed the bitterness while they called her broken. And now, this. No revenge. No fire. No punishment. Just reflection. And the taste of one's own poison. That evening, Obiaker fell silent. No more shouting. No more coughing. Just breath, rough and dry, while he sat at the base of the shrine tree and stared into nothing. The other elders left food near his feet, but he would not touch it. One young boy said he saw the old man raise his hand once toward the sky and hum. Not a tune anyone had taught him, but one that made all the dogs in the village stop barking, and then curl up at his feet. The gourd grew heavier with each passing day. It did not swell. It did not leak. Its shape remained the same, smooth, dark, perfectly round. But Ozioma could feel it, the weight. It tugged deeper now when she walked, not just at her waist but in her chest, like it carried more than blood. And yet she lifted it like air. When she tied the sash each morning, her hands moved without effort. Her hips bore it like an old rhythm. Even the animals no longer paused when it brushed her leg. They had come to accept it as part of her, not an object, not a punishment, but an organ. But the others were not so calm. People had begun to whisper. They noticed how her feet left no prints when she walked through dust. How birds circled her twice before continuing their path. How the trees along the narrow footpath to the market all bent slightly, not away, but toward her. How babies, even the colicky ones, stopped crying in her presence. They whispered louder when the river changed. It happened first on a market morning. The women went to fetch water as always, their buckets stacked on hips and heads, their laughter bouncing across the trees. But the edge of the river, the place where the youngest girls always knelt, had gone dry. Not muddy. Dry. Cracked like forgotten pots. The women gasped, shouted, called for help. But before the alarm could spread, Ozioma walked down the same path, unaware, humming her quiet tune. And the water came back. A rush, gentle and full, spreading again over the stones like it had simply taken a breath. The women watched from the ridge. Not one spoke. She dipped her feet in as she always did. The gourd pulsed once. The air grew warm. The trees seemed to sigh. The next day, a girl ran back from the well crying. The basin is empty, she shouted. The water is leaving again. But when Ozioma passed, returning from the forest with a bundle of herbs, the stream danced back into place, rippling toward her ankles like a greeting. That evening they did not call her cursed. They called her something else. And with new names came new visitors. A woman came to her hut after sunset, bent with age, hands calloused from grinding yam. A scarf tied tightly around her head, as if it held in more than just hair. She knelt before Ozioma without speaking. At her side a small boy, no older than 5. Thin, pale, breathing in tiny gasps. His skin had the sheen of someone halfway into the spirit world. The woman did not raise her eyes. Her voice barely rose above the crickets. He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Ozioma said nothing. She only looked. The gourd at her hip pulsed again. The woman held out a small bowl, empty. Her hands shook. Just a drop, she whispered. Just 1 drop of your blood. They say it heals. That the red inside your gourd burns sickness away. Please. They say you dream of rivers. That the animals bow for you. My son is not wicked. He is only dying. Please. Ozioma looked down at the child. His eyes fluttered open, watched her, then drifted shut again. Her hands went to the gourd. She untied it slowly. The heaviness was immense, but it felt right, like a drum before a ceremony, full of something ready to rise. She tipped the gourd. The blood shimmered inside, not dull, not thick, but glowing, softly. She dipped her smallest finger into the gourd. Just a touch. Then let the drop fall into the boy's mouth. Nothing happened at first. Then his breathing deepened. His lips parted. His fingers twitched. And the boy sighed. Not a struggle. Not a cough. A sigh, like he had remembered something beautiful. The woman fell to the ground. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But Ozioma raised her hand gently. No more, she said. Her voice, still soft from disuse, felt strange in the air. But it was firm. The woman nodded, tears on her chin, and scooped the boy into her arms. When they left, the stars above Ozioma flickered brighter. The gourd, though heavier than ever, felt perfectly balanced at her hip. It began with a sound. Not loud, not screaming, not howling, but soft. Like breath drawn through cracked lips. Like prayer before speech. Ozioma stirred in the dark, sweat clinging to her neck. The night outside her hut was unusually still. No frogs, no wind, not even the dry crackle of insects. Only that sound, a low chorus of whispering. She sat up slowly. The gourd at her waist pulsed once. Warm. Awake. She reached for the door curtain and pulled it aside. And froze. Dozens of gourds lined the dirt outside her hut. They hadn't been there the night before. They were arranged in a wide circle, some carved, some plain, some fat and smooth, others etched with old tribal markings and ash-dusted lids. All of them open. All of them tilted toward her doorway like faces lifted in longing. And they were speaking. Whispering. Not all at once, not like a crowd, but in layered murmurs, names, phrases, tiny pieces of songs. The voices were old, childlike, weary, strong. Some wept. Some laughed. All of them called. Ozioma stepped out barefoot. The soil beneath her feet felt warmer than usual. The moon overhead had pulled back behind a low veil of clouds, as if watching with a held breath. She stood in the center of the circle. And the gourd spoke louder. O Malika, Nkaruka, Abel, Chioma, Tari. Names. Names tumbling from the mouths of clay. Speak us, one whispered. Call us, sighed another. We bled in silence. We want to be known. Ozioma's throat tightened. The gourd at her side glowed faintly now, not red but a pale gold, as if its insides had caught the light of memory. Her breath slowed. Her heart beat in her hands. She stepped to the nearest gourd. Bet, whispered, Tari. The gourd trembled. Thunder cracked above her. She flinched but didn't stop. She stepped to the next. Abel. The wind kicked up. A warm gust. The scent of iron and honey. Another name. Chioma. Another bolt of thunder. And somewhere across the village a dog began to bark, then whimper, then go silent. One by one Ozioma spoke them. Every name the gourds begged her to say. With each word the clouds above swelled darker. With each word something heavy lifted. She didn't know how long she stood there. Only that the ground shook gently. That her voice grew stronger. That the gourds pulsed in time with her breath. When the last name was spoken, a roar split the sky. Rain did not come. But light did. A wave of it, moving across the roofs of the village, too low to be moonlight, too alive to be fire. It rippled through doors, through mats, through walls. And the women woke. Each one sat up in her bed, the young, the old, the forgotten, the forbidden. And their hands were red. Not with pain. Not with cuts. But stained, soft, warm as if dipped in memory. They stared at their palms. There was no ache. Only knowing. They breathed in deeply, and for the first time exhaled without fear. Some wept. Some rose and walked to their doorways. Others simply placed their hands over their wombs and closed their eyes. The whispers outside Ozioma's hut fell silent. The gourds had closed on their own. One by one. Like mouths after prayer. Ozioma stood in the silence. The stars returned overhead. The air was damp now, not with rain but with something fuller. Something like release. And in that silence she felt it. The blood was no longer a burden. It had become a language. And every woman in the village had just remembered how to speak it. The ritual fire burned low this time. No drums. No chants. Just the scrape of sandals and the uneasy rustle of gathered villagers. The elders sat in their half-circle as they always had, their staves planted like roots, their eyes half-closed with tired authority. But the air had changed. Everyone felt it. They had not summoned Ozioma. She had come on her own. She walked barefoot, the gourd tied plainly at her side, her head held high. No veil, no scarf, no lowered gaze. Just her name humming in the breath of the trees. Some villagers stepped back as she passed. Others leaned forward, eager, uncertain. Children peeked from behind their mothers' wraps. She stepped into the fire circle and the flames bowed inward. Then she untied the gourd and held it out. "I have come," she said, her voice clear, "to give it back." The elders didn't answer. Her aunt, seated just beyond the men, inhaled sharply. Ozioma stepped closer, lifting the gourd so that its mouth faced the oldest among them. Obiako, the one who had called her cursed from the beginning. "I give this to you," she said. "To hold, to taste, to understand." He chuckled. A dry, dismissive sound. "You come to offer shame, girl?" Ozioma didn't flinch. "You called it shame. You made me drink it. So now I ask that you do the same." He waved a hand. "You do not summon us. We summon you." Ozioma turned to the others. "Who among you will taste what you forced on me?" Silence. The fire crackled. Someone in the crowd shifted nervously. Still no one answered. So she moved. Swiftly. She stepped forward and pressed the gourd to Obiako's chest. Before he could rise, before he could protest, she tilted it and poured a single drop onto his lips. The effect was instant. His eyes widened, then rolled back. His mouth opened in a silent scream and his body went rigid. The staff fell from his hands with a dull thud. He collapsed to his knees. Gasps echoed through the circle. He began to mutter, not words of anger, not curses, but her name. "Ozioma, Ozioma, Ozioma." He rocked slightly, tears slipping down his cheeks, hands trembling. A second elder stood abruptly. "What have you done?" She turned toward him, the gourd still in hand. "Nothing more than what was done to me." He took a step back. "Keep it away." She did not move closer. But her voice rang louder. "If you will not drink, then you will never again ask a girl to." The wind picked up slightly. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called once, then fell silent. Ozioma faced the half-circle. "Let this end with me. Let no other child be tied with silence. Let no gourd carry forced shame." The elders didn't speak. But none stepped forward. Not one hand reached out. Not one mouth opened to receive. They looked at Obiako, still on his knees, still whispering her name like a broken drum, and said nothing. She tied the gourd again to her waist. Not out of fear. Not out of surrender. But out of power. She turned to the gathered villagers. Her eyes swept the crowd. The women, the children, even the men who had looked away when she had first bled. "Then never," she said, "make another girl drink again." And she walked away from the fire. The flames behind her sputtered. Then died. The night the blood moon rose, no one in the village slept. The sky wore its red face with no shame. A deep, smoldering hue, too full to be just a moon, too near to be just light. Even the animals were quiet, crouched beneath trees or curled beside their humans, listening. Something ancient stirred in the soil. Ozioma had not spoken in days. She spent the week before gathering herbs no one recognized, humming songs no one had taught her. The gourd at her waist pulsed heavier with every breath of wind. Even the trees leaned slightly away now, as though bracing for something. When the moon reached its highest point, round, bleeding, she stepped barefoot to the altar stone at the village's center. The same one they had once forced her to kneel beside. The one that had held so many shameful offerings in the name of cleansing. She didn't wait for permission. She climbed it, and everyone came to watch. Not because they were invited, but because something in their blood pulled them forward. Children with newly woken dreams, elders who remembered things they had tried to forget. Women who had carried their shame quietly and men who had helped carve it into others. The gourd glowed against her hip. She untied it slowly, held it in both hands. It pulsed once, twice. She lifted it over her head. And then, without a word, she brought it down on the altar stone. The sound was not the sound of pottery breaking. It was louder, thicker, older. A crack like sky splitting from inside. Red light burst from the gourd's shattered halves, not blood, not flame, but something between both. It rose upward, column-like, into the moon's gaze. The crowd staggered back. Some cried out. Some fell to their knees. And all the women gasped. A heat spread through them, sharp and alive, rising in their chests like a truth they had swallowed for too long. Then came the sound. Not a scream. Not a song. Drums. Inside them. Inside their ribs. Like a second heart waking up. The younger girls clutched their chests. The older ones closed their eyes and wept. Even the men felt it. The soundless beat beneath their skin. A rhythm they didn't understand but couldn't ignore. Ozioma stood in the center of the broken light. She did not glow. She did not burn. She simply was, mouth closed, face calm, her shadow stretching into the red sky. And all around the village, from doorway to doorway, the same name rang like thunder in every chest. Ozioma. They buried the pieces of the gourd in silence. No one told them to. No ritual was performed. No priest called down the ancestors. No chants were offered. The village women gathered at dawn, hands still trembling from the night before. And together, without instruction, they dug a shallow bed behind the altar stone, the place where Ozioma had stood, and placed each broken piece into the earth. The soil welcomed them, softened around them. A light rain fell just as the last shard disappeared. And then they left it alone. Ozioma was gone. No one saw her leave. No footprints. No gourd. No word of goodbye. But no one ever called her missing. Because something had been left behind. The earth remembered. And in time the earth answered. Months passed. Then a year. And then one morning, a sapling appeared where the gourd had been buried. Small. Quiet. Its leaves a deep, unusual green that shimmered red at their edges. No one dared uproot it. No child picked at its bark. The elders said nothing. But the women watched. The tree grew fast. Too fast. By its second year, it stood taller than any man in the village. By its third, it began to bloom. Only at night. Red flowers opened wide after sundown, velvety petals thick with scent. They smelled like smoke and honey. Like memory. Like the breath between a name and its answer. And that's when the girls began to gather. Those who bled early. Those who had been hushed. Those whose questions were dismissed with sharp eyes or tired hands. They came barefoot, silent, and sat beneath the tree's dark leaves, letting the petals fall onto their laps, letting the scent soak into their hair. Some spoke. Some just listened. Some leaned against the bark and wept without knowing why. And in the morning they would return home different. Taller somehow. Fuller. As if something inside them had been unknotted. Soon, the women began to collect the dew from the tree's leaves. Just a drop. Placed on the tongue. And always, the same effect. The remembering. The names of ancestors long erased. The songs never taught. The drumbeats rising in their bones. They called it Ozioma's tree. And when new girls came into their blood too early, too loud, too full of fire, the old women no longer sighed in fear. They smiled. And said, "You are ready." Then they sent them to sit beneath the red-blooming tree, not to be shamed, but to remember who they were. And who dared try to forget them.